All right, time for part 2, which is your connective tissue. And this is, even though we said epithelial is like all of your skin and all those things, connective tissue, this is your most abundant tissue. Make sure you know that. This is found everywhere in the body and all through different types of organs. It does have a variation in blood supply. Some things like tendons and ligaments, it's connective tissue, have a very poor blood supply. Some have a lot of blood supply. Blood itself is a connective tissue. And then some are like cartilage that are completely avascular and have no blood supply. So this one really kind of depends on which tissue it is. But what ties them all together is that they all have this extracellular matrix, extra being outside, cellular your cells. So outside of your cells, there's this matrix of different proteins and gel-like fluid and kind of stuff holding those cells together in that shape, which we kind of take for granted, but it's a pretty amazing thing. And one of the things you can look up is what's called a ghost heart that they are doing with this extracellular matrix, where they have taken a heart, a fully functioning heart, and put it in a solution to remove all the cells, leaving just this matrix of proteins on the outside. And then I can put new cells on it to let it grow and make a new heart with cells that match that person. They've successfully done this in mice, about 75% success. So it's really exciting where this will go in the future as far as using for organ donation. There's actually a successful story of a lady that had cancer in her throat and in her trachea. So what they did is they took the trachea from a cadaver, which is a recently deceased person, removed all the cells, leaving this matrix scaffold, and took the lady's, some of her healthy cells, put them on that scaffold and let it grow. So now she had a fully functioning trachea without any risk of rejection because it's covered with her own cells, and they were able to replace her trachea that way. So trachea is a pretty easy one because it's just a hollow tube versus, the heart and kidneys, which are more complex, but that's kind of down the line and a really exciting thing to see where it goes. So this little scaffold that our cells are stuck to is actually really important and useful. So connective tissue can have multiple functions, protecting, supporting, binding things together, or act as a water reservoir, which you will see. There are 5 main types we're going to look at, and then again, there's subcategories within some of these. Cartilage, bone, blood, your dense connective tissues, and loose connective tissues. So you have connective tissue as your overall with like subcategories, which are these, and then categories within that. So like cartilage, you've heard of cartilage before, right? You've got cartilage in your nose and in your back and in your joints. But it's not all the same cartilage. There's actually 3 different cartilages, depending on the flexibility. So hyaline cartilage, which is the first one, this is your most abundant cartilage. This is what you find in your joints on the end of your bones to prevent them from rubbing against each other. You have this in your rib cage. This is what holds your ribs to your sternum, is so that you have that flexibility, is hyaline cartilage. Fetus, as it's growing, is made of hyaline cartilage and eventually will turn into bone. Fibrocartilage, this is a really tough cartilage. This is what you have in your discs of your vertebra in your back. So that's got to be, right, with all that bending and moving, that's got to be and also you've got gravity pushing down on you. This is a much tougher cartilage than hyaline cartilage. And then elastic, it's like the flimsiest of them. This is what you have in the tip of your nose and your ears. That's an elastic cartilage. So again, they're all cartilage because they're preventing the bone from rubbing, but they're made a little differently. So this is a picture with hyaline cartilage. You can see there are chondrocytes, chondro meaning cartilage, site meaning cell. So these are your cartilage cells that are in this picture. And this is what your elastic cartilage looks like. To me, it looks like a jelly sandwich because like I've got grape jelly in the middle there. So again, they look different in the microscope because they have different functions and different structure. Bone is known as osseous tissue. You can see it. It actually is interesting. It grows in circles like this, making it very strong. It looks like tree bark. It's actually composed of lacunae, and you've got this matrix of calcium growing around it that makes it very tough and durable. This is actually your calcium storage. So we need both, you always hear eat your calcium for strong bones. You actually use the calcium in other ways in your body, and we store it. So we need plenty of it so it can get stored and make our bones very strong. Blood is a connective tissue. I mean, you may not think of blood as a tissue, but remember, multiple cells working together is a tissue. And in blood, I've got red blood cells, I have white blood cells. It's surrounded by this fluid matrix of your plasma that's fluid and different proteins floating around it. So yeah, this is a connective tissue. And you can see in this picture, the ones that are pink are your red blood cells that's used for carrying oxygen, and the ones that have purple to them are your white blood cells that are used to fight diseases. Because interesting, you can tell in these red blood cells here, there's no nucleus. Red blood cells do not have a nucleus to them, which I think is super interesting. All right, our next one is your dense connective tissue. This is because it has all these collagen fibers making up its matrix, making it very strong. It's a very like rope-like structures. Such as our tendons and ligaments. These are dense connective tissues. If you've ever tried to chew on one because you got it in your chicken or something, it's super tough. You need to know the difference between tendons and ligaments. Tendons connect muscle to bone. Ligaments connect bone to bone. Okay, so that's why ligaments connect like things, is how I kind of help remember. Ligaments are like things, so they connect bone to bone. Tendons are muscle to bone. So make sure you know which one's which. And this is a picture. You can see how closely tight together, and it looks like all the strands of a rope just tightly bound together, making them really tough and durable. And then the last is our loose connective tissue, which there are 3 types: areolar, adipose, and reticular. Loose connective tissue are just that. They're going to be looser. The fibers are further apart. There's a lot more flexibility, that kind of stuff for loose connective. The first one being areolar. This is kind of like the glue that holds things together. So you know when you've had to peel an orange, right, and you're taking the skin off, there's that white stuff holding the skin to the flesh, and in between making the little wedges of your orange, that stuff holding it together, that's kind of like an areolar tissue. It's holding things together, holding the skin to the flesh. Same thing. This is what you have holding your skin to the muscle underneath it, is an areolar tissue. But because it's so loose in nature that water can be in this tissue, fill up the spaces, and if that happens too much, you get edema. And you can see in this picture that water fills up in those spaces between your cells and you get swelling. So we call that edema, and this is why your lymphatic system is important, because it can pick up this fluid, filter it, clean it, and put it back in your blood and get reused. Phagocytes also wander through here. Phagocytes eat stuff, basically, so they help destroy any bacteria or dead cells that are hiding out in your tissues. And this is what areolar looks like in the microscope. I kind of describe it as a spider web. You can see there's definitely nuclei in here, but all these proteins surrounding it as well. Adipose, right, we already know is fat. So this is your fat tissue, is your adipose, which is your fat cells. And you have this, subcutaneous. Sub means under, cutis means skin, so under the skin. You have a layer that's for protection and insulation from the heat and cold. You have it on some of your organs. This is what actually holds your kidneys in place in your abdominal cavity so they don't go flopping around. And then you also have it around your hips, breasts, those kinds of things where you're storing fat as a backup fuel. And this is what adipose looks like, which is kind of interesting. To me, I describe it as bubbles. But if I zoom in and look at those bubbles, I have this little nucleus pushed to the side and this big, giant storage area in the middle. So those are adipose tissue. So that's why adipose it takes up a lot of room, but doesn't have as much mass compared to muscle because of this empty, big storage space. And the last one is your reticular connective tissue. The thing you need to know about this is that this is in your lymphoid organs, so your lymphatic stuff, so your lymph nodes, your spleen, those kinds of things. This is where you're going to find your reticular tissue. So that's the biggest thing I need you to know about it, is it's in your lymphatic structures. All right, that is it for connective tissues. I will talk to you again on our next tissue type with muscles and nervous.